at all, but an elected oligarchy disguised as one. A genuine democracy would function very differently. Not only can I demonstrate that, I can present a relatively simple fix to change our elected oligarchy into a democracy that will transfer power out of the hands of the political parties and into the hands of the voters where it should be. I understand that you claim that you do your show as you want to empower people. Well, that is the sole function of a democracy. You should, to be consistent, support the creation of a democracy. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think I can logically demonstrate that democracy should lead to what you called the collective good and the most rational course of action, or at the very least, demonstrate the change I present will lead to a substantial improvement over the present system, and getting better is what it's all about. If I am right, isn't getting a genuine democracy the priority, as everything else follows on from that change? That's from Rohan.
Hey, Rohan, how you doing tonight?
Hi, good evening, Steph. How are you?
I'm well. Don't ever keep faith in me. Don't you say I nearly lost faith in you. If I ever lose, no, don't keep faith in me. I don't want anyone's faith. Okay, so give me your definition of democracy.
Well, a democracy, I think, the primary function of democracy is to manifest the will of the majority. And if it doesn't do that on a pretty regular basis, then it's not a democracy. It's a pretty good indication that it's not a democracy.
Okay, and how is the will of the majority manifested in a democracy?
Through the voting system. I mean, it depends on the form of democracy. Usually, most countries that call themselves democracies are electoral democracies, and it's done through voting periodically in elections. That's how it's supposed to be done.
And how are people supposed to decide what is the good? How are they supposed to learn what is the good so that they can vote wisely?
I think the way I see it is that over time, people will vote for certain things, and either make their lives better or it won't. So if you're doing what is the will of the majority, you should end up in a situation where the majority are satisfied with what is happening.
That's not answering my question. Just so you know. Okay, let me ask it to you. Let me ask it to you another way, Rohan. Do you think that if the government trains the young, that they can wisely choose what is best for them, even if it comes at the expense of government power? In other words, do you think that government education, for want of a better word, government instruction of the young, is compatible with being able to objectively determine what is best for the population, which sometimes what is best for the population, I'm sure you will agree, sometimes what's best for the population is a reduction in government power, a shrinking of taxation, a shrinking of government authority. Do you think that people can objectively judge the size and scope of government power if they're trained in government by government?
Well, I think you're looking at it the wrong way, in my opinion. I mean, all a person needs to do for democracy to work, all a person needs to do is to decide whether his life or her life is being satisfied, is satisfactory. If he feels his or her life is not satisfactory, they will vote for something that they think will make it satisfactory. If what they vote for doesn't make it satisfactory, then they'll vote for something else. So it's like a self-correcting mechanism that should lead to the collective good. They don't necessarily need a government education to tell them whether they're...
Let me put it to you another way. I don't know what you're talking about. Let me put it to you another way. Do you think it's possible that if cigarette companies trained the young about cigarettes, that the young would grow up with objective knowledge about the health problems of cigarettes or candy or soda pop or any of these things? Do you think that that would be possible?
See, what you're talking about there is not democracy. What you're talking about there is somebody who controls somebody who controls information flow.
Fantastic.
I think that's what you're talking about there.
So if you have 12 years, 6 hours a day, plus homework, 5 days a week of training the young in what to think, you are controlling information flow in society, right? And so if the government is in charge of instructing the young then the government is going to instruct them that freedom is not so good, the government is really, really great, and more government is even better. And so if you are looking for something which would help democracy as it stands, if you are with me in that not having government schools would be a lot better in terms of, everyone says, we want diversity. Well, here's one standard curriculum for the entire planet, pretty much. So I would agree with you that democracy is very much hampered by who controls the flow of information. And the primary agency that controls the flow of information, towards the young in particular, is the government. So you can't have a democracy when the government trains the citizens for, 10,000 hours or more when they're young.
Yeah, but you're making an assumption that people are perfectly buy into the propaganda 100%. I mean, there's no indication. I mean, if you look, when Russia controlled information given to its population 100%, the people did not trust in the government because they could see the reality of the situation did not match with what the government was saying. I mean, people do have a reality. What I was saying was that people live in their own reality.
Sorry, Rahun. Do you talk much about government power with the average person who's been raised in government schools? Do you find them to be enormously skeptical of government power and very desperately want there to be no government schools and no welfare state and no government-controlled old age pensions and so on? Or do you find that they have this view that, freedom was terrible, the free market was terrible, we had to be protected from all these rapacious corporations, and in stepped the white knight of the state to save everyone from the nasty capitalists? I mean, I don't know who you've been talking to, but just about everyone I talk to has that particular perspective. So I'm not sure I see the same skepticism that you do.
Well, I mean, if you look at if you look at the surveys, say in the USA, let's take that example. You look at surveys of people's satisfaction in the direction the country is heading. It's usually very, very low. It's not. It's like 20%, 25%. I think recently it was 16, 17%. So the government might be telling you all kinds of things, but people see a reality, and they think this is not.
I'm sorry, you don't really get how. I'm sorry to be annoying, maybe even insulting, Rowan, but you don't get how propaganda works. The fact that people are dissatisfied with the status quo is exactly what big government advocates want. Because if people believe that the country is going in the wrong direction or that the country is somehow bad, then that's a great market to sell a big, giant new government program, right? So, for instance, after 9/11, they had all of this prefabbed legislation ready for mass surveillance and mass control and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, wow, people are really unhappy that the Twin Towers went down, which makes perfect sense to me. And so they ran to the government for a solution. The solution was the Patriot Act. The solution was invading Afghanistan. The solution was, for some reason, invading Iraq. So the fact that people are dissatisfied is perfectly in line with the growth of government.
No, I don't agree with that. I think people didn't run to the government for the Patriot Act. The government used that as an excuse to increase surveillance over people, and that people were more skeptical than you make them out to be. People are, in the recent terrorist attacks in London, Theresa May is advocating increase in the amount of surveillance on the internet, but people are quite skeptical of what she's doing. And now, I mean, we do have government schools, but we do also have the internet where people can get information from other sources. So there is a flow of information that goes well beyond.
Yeah, but the fact that you have something that can help you push back against government propaganda doesn't mean that government propaganda is okay. Hey, man, I'm going to inject you with a horrible disease, but don't worry, there might be an antidote somewhere out there on the internet. Doesn't make me a good guy, right? I mean, the fact that there's the internet allows you to push back against this stuff. And the internet, by the way, of course, was not planned for by the government control over academia and over the media, where you often have to have a license, or in England you pay directly for the television license. So control of Hollywood through unions, control of academia, control of mainstream media, control of government schools, and so on. So the fact that there's an internet doesn't make that stuff okay. It just means that you might have a fighting chance if you work hard enough to undo some of the programming.
Yeah, I think we're kind of on parallel tracks here. I mean, I think I don't disagree with you that there is government propaganda, but what I do disagree with you is that people have the ability to see through it because their lives are not been improved. I mean, people who lost their jobs, who don't have, who are unsatisfied with what the government provides, will naturally want to change the status quo. Now, what the democracy does, it allows them a free market choice to choose which direction the government will go. I mean, I'm not saying the government...
Wait, sorry, did you say democracy offers people a free market choice?
If it is a democracy, it will offer a free market choice. What we have now is a very peculiar situation where it's not an electoral democracy, it's electoral oligarchy. We are ruled...
All right, I'm just sorry, can I just back you up for a second? Because you said you didn't think a lot of people were keen on the Patriot Act. So according to a February 16th to 17th, 2004 CNN USA Today Gallup poll, only 1/4 of Americans, 26%, believe the Patriot Act goes too far in restricting people's civil liberties in order to fight terrorism. Nearly as many, 21%, think it does not go far enough, while the plurality, 43%, believes it is about right. That represents a more than 2-to-1 balance of opinion against the idea that the act goes too far. Public reaction changed little since first measured the previous August. So I'm afraid you're wrong.
Okay, I mean, in terms of the Patriot Act, that it probably doesn't affect people's lives that much, so they are willing to...
No. Rohan, sorry, you're wrong. You said that you didn't think people much supported the Patriot Act, and you're incorrect.
All right, okay, I'm incorrect about this, but what does it negate everything else I'm saying?
Well, it says that you pull opinions out of your ass. It says that you believe things that aren't true. That seems kind of important to me.
But I didn't know you were going to bring up the Patriot Act. If I knew that, I could have looked up.
No, but you had an opinion about it either way. I mean, you still had an opinion. You could have said, I don't know, but you faked knowledge. You didn't have. You said you thought, according to your theory, people can see through propaganda. My theory was that people are easily propagandized, or at least government control of education propagandizes people significantly. You said, well, no, they can see through it. I mean, I brought up the Patriot Act, and you said, well, I don't think that many people were very keen on it. So as far as, like, listen, when we start into a conversation, Rohan, I just want you to understand this. Maybe you don't have this with other people you chat with. When you and I start into a conversation, I am scanning for areas wherein you are being honorable or areas in which you're not being honorable. Now, if you made up a point which is incorrect in order to bolster your argument, do you think that A, leads me to trust you more, or B, leads me to trust you less, particularly when you try and gloss over it immediately? In other words, how do we progress forward in a debate if you've weaseled the first verifiable thing that I can check on?
Well, I apologize. I didn't think of it in that way. I made an assumption. I was wrong about that assumption, but I was trying to I was thinking on my feet, and I just, said something that perhaps I shouldn't have said. I apologize for that.
What do you mean perhaps you shouldn't have said? Do you think it is a good thing to make things up to win an argument? Like maybe 50-50, 51-49? Where are we here?
Yeah, it's just a matter of speaking. I'm not saying it is a good thing, it's a bad thing. It was just the way it came out.
Oh, it's not a bad thing.
No, I'm not saying it was not a bad thing. I'm saying it is a bad thing, but it's just the way that it came out. I said perhaps it was not a good. It's just a manner of speaking rather than a position I'm taking.
It's just a manner of speaking?
Yeah, just the way it came out. I'm not trying to.
The way it came out. Yeah. It's not diarrhea, man. This is words you're choosing to speak.
Well, it's my first time on this kind of public platform. As you know, I'm just saying things that I'm trying my best.
So the first time you're allowing yourself to be kind of weaselly about a point of fact, because it's the first time. So it's not that you have standards, or you do have standards, but you're willing to drop them if you feel at all nervous.
No, I'm just doing my best. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm just doing my best here. I'm not trying to deceive you. It just, I made a mistake. I apologize for that, and I don't know what else I can do at this point.
All right, let's move on to your concept of free market democracy. What does it mean when you say a free market democracy?
Well, if we had a democracy, like can I just track back a little bit and define democracy first?
You already did that. That's the first thing I asked you.
Well, I said that's the primary function of democracy is to exercise the will of the majority, but
manifest the will of the people.
Manifest the will of the people. But the tenet on which it rests is that the people are the supreme power. If people are not the supreme power, then that's why the state will manifest the will of the majority. It's kind of a natural consequence of that tenet.
Okay, so the people are the supreme power. What does that mean? They can say no to taxation if they disagree with what's going on?
Exactly. I mean,
oh, okay. So taxation is voluntary, and so it's like a solicitation for a charity. They can send you something in the mail saying, "We want to do X, Y, and Z. Would you like to contribute to it?" I'm actually very much on board with you for what it's worth regarding that particular approach to things. I think that would be ideal. In other words, the government is no different fundamentally from any other social agency. They can request for money in order to pursue their particular goals, but you have the right to say no because as a citizen you are the final authority, right?
Well, only if the majority have agreed on that position.
Oh, so if the majority, so if the majority say that taxes should double, like 51% of people say that taxes should double, then the other 49% of people have to obey that tax increase or go to jail, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's
so
the
it's
worst
not the
case
people.
scenario, yeah.
Hang on. It's not the people who are the final authority. It's 50% plus one. It's a plurality or majority of the people who are the final authority, because the minority is certainly not the final authority, right?
Yeah, the majority. I mean, it's not as if the will of the minority won't be manifested in some ways or cannot be, but basically the primary function of the democratic state is to exercise the will of the majority. That's that, and within constitutional limits, there are obviously going to be limits to what the majority can direct.
What would those limits be, do you think?
The limits, Canada has a constitution. Those are the limits defined within the constitution. Those are the limits that would exist in a constitutional, in a democracy.
Although, of course, there would be a methodology for changing the constitution, right?
I imagine, yeah, there's perhaps something like that would have to be looked into. Like 2/3 of the legislator have to agree on it, or there's some kind of rules about that. I'm pretty sure, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, there's tons of amendments to the U.S. Constitution. So these limits, or these constitutional limits, are to some degree illusory because a supermajority, or maybe a 2/3 majority, as you say, can still override the 1/3 who may resist, right?
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I'm not too sure on all the way the rules are. I think there are laws that the judicial branch is separate from the legislative branch.
Okay, so what you need to do, just to be, and the reason I'm asking you all this, Rohin, sorry for interrupting, the reason I'm asking all this is people always say the will of the majority and the will of the people and the people are the final, but you're just talking about the majority. Democracy is a way of imposing the will of the majority on the minority for most things, and for a few things, it's the will of a 2/3 majority on the 1/3 minority, right? So to be technically accurate, democracy is the way that the will of the majority is imposed upon the minority. Now, that even isn't particularly accurate, because in democracy, there's no direct automatic voting, right? Like you don't just vote for a particular proposition and then it's magically put into place. Because the way that you generally do it in a democracy is you vote for a representative, right? And that representative, like a congressman or a congresswoman or whatever, you vote for a representative who then goes to the legislature and creates or makes the laws, right? Now, in democracies, there's no enforceable contract between the voters and their representatives, right? I mean, George Herbert Walker Bush famously made the pledge, read my lips, no new taxes. And then he got into office and pretty much immediately raised taxes, right? So there's no enforceable contract between the voter and the elected official, the politician. In fact, the politician doesn't even know who voted for him because usually it's a secret ballot, right? So if you make promises, like let's say the will of the majority chooses no more taxes, no more taxes, right? George H.W. Bush, right? No new taxes. So people vote for that, and then he just raises taxes anyway. So it really is not so much the will of the people at all. It's not even the will of the majority. It is the infliction of those who can gain the most votes on those who can't gain the most votes, right? The power resides with those who can gain the most votes through no enforceable contract of any kind whatsoever. No, well, if you vote for me, I'm going to do X, and if I don't do X, you can get your vote back, right? There's no refunds. Do not spoil, mutilate, bend, or staple any of this stuff. It is who can get the most votes in a completely unenforceable contract. That is where the real power resides.
An electoral democracy. We are an electoral.
I'm sorry?
People get elected. That's exactly my point. The supreme power does not reside in the people who elect the voters. It resides in the people who are elected. This is precisely what I'm trying to say.
But sorry, just before we get to that, how is all of this a free market?
If it was a free market, then you could reject all those on the ballot.
Oh, like a none of the above?
Exactly.
But
you
do understand, though, that for the most part, certainly modern democracies, and I would argue democracies throughout history, have run on pure corruption. And the corruption is this. If you're dependent on the government for your money, like if you have an old age pension, if you are on welfare, if you are part of the military industrial complex, if you are dependent on government contracts, if you work for the government, if you are dependent, as I think it's about maybe a little over half of Americans are, if you're dependent on the government for your income, in other words, if you receive far more from the government than you pay in taxes, do you think that you can be objective about government spending?
You don't need to be objective. You just have to vote for your own selfish interest.
And this is good for you? This is what you think is good?
If the majority benefit from what the government is doing, then that, by definition, is for the collective good. And it is the most rational course of action. If what they choose ends up in a situation where it makes everyone's life worse, obviously then everyone will be worse off. And then they'll have to change what they voted for and do something else. They might head off in the wrong direction, might end up in a place where they made their life worse off, but then they have the power in their own hands to change direction, go another direction, and choose a set of policies that will make their lives better. So democracy is a self-correcting, self-driving mechanism that leads to the collective good.
Excellent. Okay, so you say, sorry to interrupt. Democracy is a self-correcting mechanism. So can you point out to me, please, the longest lasting democracy in the world?
I cannot know.
But you have a conjecture, right? You have a hypothesis. I mean, you can look at non-democratic systems like, 6,000 years of Chinese history that was fairly uninterrupted, which was, very, very high IQ. They had entrance exams that were like IQ tests to become a public servant. There was significant stability throughout many thousands of these years. So you have a multi-thousand-year system that sustained itself. Can you think of the longest democracy that has existed? Because you're saying it's a self-correcting system, which means it should do even better than oligarchies.
Well, the problem is that we've never had a true. Well, I can't go back throughout. I can't. Or I don't want to deceive you again. I don't want to say something I don't quite know. But to the best of my knowledge, as far as I can see, that there's only two countries I know currently that have what could be described as a true democracy, and one is Switzerland, the other one is Uruguay, and they're both compared to their. If you look at the satisfaction and trust in government for the people of Switzerland, it's very, very high. And the same goes for Uruguay compared to all the other Latin American countries, because they exercise direct democracy, and this gives power to the citizens, and they seem to be able to do a decent job in creating a decent society in which is where they can live. So I can't answer your question, but I can just point out that when we do have democracy, the outcomes are pretty good.
Okay, so you don't really have an example of a long-lasting democracy.
I couldn't give you an example of long-lasting democracy, because I don't think we ever had a democracy. To be quite honest, I've never seen, as far as I know in history, I've never seen any examples of a democracy.
What we have. Do you think? Sorry to interrupt. Do you think that there might be anything else that might significantly contribute to the success of Uruguay and Switzerland?
Uh, yeah, sure they are. Yeah.
Like what?
Um, I mean, I suppose that you have an idea that IQ is a very important factor in the creation of a good society, and I think yes, IQ is important, and then if you combine IQ with a democracy, then you end up with a better situation than you would without one, in general.
Right. Do you know what the racial and ethnic composition is in Uruguay?
No, I don't know.
Would it
I know
surprise you that it is overwhelmingly white?
No, I think if I remember something, it's about 10% Afro-Caribbean or
No, I'm going to
Afro-African,
read this to you because I
and
don't want you
then
to go around this
90%.
path of making stuff up. So it's 87.7% white, it's 4.6% black, 2.4% indigenous, 5.1% other/none, and 0.2% Asian. So
Okay,
overwhelmingly white.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
know that Switzerland, of course, is overwhelmingly white or European at least, right?
Yes. I mean, yeah. All right. That's I'm quite happy to concede those points. I got no issue with that. Yeah.
So it may not be that it's direct democracy that is the significant factor. It may be that you have a largely ethnically homogeneous population composed of whites with a European ancestry, right? And Uruguay has an average IQ in the high 90s, Switzerland average IQ of 101, and that is a factor. So you may be looking at an effect rather than a cause.
Yeah, possibly, but that doesn't mean that democracy doesn't have an effect. It just could be other correlating factors, or it doesn't also mean that in a low IQ population that the application of a democracy can have a better lead to better outcomes than having electoral oligarchy.
But what I don't quite understand is I think you and I would have to agree on this, that if individual citizens vote for their own immediate economic benefit, then in general, people will vote to take away the property of other people because it's easier to get a check than it is to go to work, right? And so there must be some larger universal principle that people are willing to sacrifice their own immediate financial interest for. There must be some deferral of gratification, and there must be the high potential for income in a free market for people to reject the temptations of the welfare state, right? Because if you have an IQ of 80, the welfare state is way better for you than working. If you have an IQ of 100, the welfare state is worse for you than working. And if you have an IQ of 120, it's way worse for you than working. So if you have a low IQ population, then by definition, they're going to prefer immediate government checks to long-term abstract property rights. Now, they will do better in the long run if there's no welfare state, but in the short run, which is kind of what they think of, given that the IQ is lower, they can't really defer gratification as much. So if you have a lower IQ population, you're going to have people voting for their own immediate economic self-interest, which is going to be getting money from the government, which is going to drive the productive people away from the economy, which is going to cause the Venezuelan-style socialist collapse. So if you're just going to say, well, we've got this magic paint called direct democracy that's going to make all societies better, I really have to push back on you about that, because I think there's a lot of other factors that direct democracy, like the welfare state, works to a longer degree in a smaller, high IQ, ethnically homogenous population. Like if you look at South Korea and Japan, and if you have high IQ and a relatively homogenous, ethnically homogenous population, the welfare state is much more sustainable than it is in other kinds of situations or scenarios. Because, as you know, you get a low IQ population in a high IQ country where there's a welfare state, and the low IQ population vote for more and more free government stuff, and then they have more and more babies, and the high IQ population pays more and more taxes, which means they have to work harder and harder and have fewer and fewer babies, and it doesn't work at any level for any direct period of time. So I think you might want to focus just a little bit more on things like IQ and demographics when you're looking to design a better system.
Well, I would like to make the point that when people choose the welfare state, for example, in corrupt countries like Latin America, you're talking about people get votes in governments that will give them give them a check every month. Let's put it simply, they'll give them a check every month. So, but what they voted for is a check. What they didn't vote for is the accompanying corruption, because the actual goal of
the check. Anybody with half a brain knows that the check is corruption, right? Because if the check is corruption, because your vote is being bought from you, it would be much more honest and much less economically catastrophic if somebody just gave you $500 for your vote at the polling booth, because at least that wouldn't be a long-term demographic shifting, birth rate altering system. This is like the lower IQ people are like, hey, free stuff, woohoo! And some of the higher IQ people, it's a bell curve, right? So it's not like there's the accompanying corruption. Giving people the welfare state, or giving people pensions, or giving people unemployment insurance, or increases thereof in return for their vote, that is corruption. That's bribing people for their vote.
Yeah, but that's absolutely valid. There's nothing. It's not corruption. It's you're offering something.
Paying people for their vote is not corruption?
No, I mean, if I can just put this more.
No. You just said it's perfectly valid. It's not corrupt. But I just described buying people's votes by offering them free government stuff. I'm just curious what your reasoning is here.
It's not corrupt. It's a public policy that you're stating, and you're saying, I will, I just keep it simply. You're offering a check to a certain percentage of the population every month if you vote for that particular political party. That's what's.
You don't consider that corrupt?
No, it's not corruption at all. That's legal, perfectly legal.
Because it's legal?
Yes, because it's legal.
Oh, so you're more of a positive law rather than a natural law. There's no morality, there's no universal standards of good or bad behavior. There's just, hey, it's legal, so there's no moral problem with it whatsoever.
Well, if it operates in the context of democracy, I don't think it's an issue.
Does it trouble you at all emotionally when politicians say, vote for me, and I'm going to increase your welfare payments? Does it trouble you? Does it strike you as at all problematic? Just curious.
Okay, can I answer in a long-winded way? This is something that I would like to tackle, but I can't tackle it in the way you're asking me. Right? Can I tackle it in a slightly different way?
Well, no, just tell me if it bothers you, and then you can give me the long. Like, is there any problem?
Yes,
it's legal, so it doesn't bother you at all.
Of course, it will bother me because in the long run, as you say, it's not sustainable. That's why it bothers me. That's the issue with it.
Oh, so if it's nothing to do with ethics, it's just to do with the fact that it's not sustainable.
Yes.
So you have no ethical standards outside of the local laws, is that right? Like, you don't have any ethical standards that are larger or wider than what's written in the books.
Maybe you can, if you're going to explain to me what ethical standard is being violated by offering people welfare. I don't see it. I don't understand.
It's a violation of property rights, and it's bribing for votes.
It's not a violation of property rights if you're within a democracy, because that's the compact in which you live. You live in a society, and you have the vote, and you decide what will happen in that society. So the majority of people decide it.
But the people, hang on. But the people who, God, the number of rich people is smaller than the number of poor people. Can we at least get that math straight? And therefore, the number of rich people, the rich people cannot outvote the poor people. And so if the government says we're going to take from the rich and give to the poor, the idea that the rich live in some sort of democracy where they have a say is nonsense. I mean, the rich will do other things. Politically connected, they'll donate to politicians or do charity dinners or whatever. But no, it's a violation of property rights. If somebody says, I am going to, if you bribe someone with your own money, that's bad enough. If you bribe people with other people's money, that's really,
okay.
I mean,
okay. Well, which is better? That a country that does what's in the interest of the richest 1%, or a country that does what's in the interest of the majority? Which one is better?
I don't know what you mean by in the interests of. They're not fucking livestock, man. They're human beings. There's an objective moral standard. Thou shalt not steal. Do not violate people's property rights. Do not go and say, oh, howling mob, I'm going to string up these rich people. I'm going to go through their pockets and I'm going to give you everything that I find in return for you giving me your allegiance. That is not moral. That's wrong. I mean, look, I have a problem enough with the government saying, okay, I'm the only ones who can protect your property rights. But it is immoral to go and say to anyone, give me your vote, and I'm going to go and take money from other people by force and give it to you. Oh, I'll make it legal. I don't care. But it's a legality matter. This is a philosophy show. This is not a positive law show. This is not a law review show. This is a philosophy show, which means universal, moral, and ethical standards.
But what if the 1% in Greek society take money out of the pockets of the poorest? I mean, is that okay?
How do they do that?
Well, because if you can I give you an example of a study? Princeton did a study of just looking at the policies the U.S. government enacted between, I can't remember exact dates, but it was like 1988 and 2001 or 1981 and 2001, and they compared that the policy enacted with the opinions of the majority and the opinions of the richest 1%. They found that the policy enacted by the U.S. government had no correlation with opinions of the majority of people, but they had a strong correlation with what the 1% wanted. And so the 1%.
Wait, what? Hang on. Are you saying that the richest 1% really, really want a welfare state that they always have to pay into and are never going to benefit from?
Whatever is happening in the USA, what happens is that the agenda is doing what's best for the richest 1%, but they fling crumbs to enough people to get enough people to vote for that political party, to tag along, and so they can pursue their own agenda. So it's the welfare state. What you're seeing is an effect. Which
Wait, are you saying that the non-rich in America are only getting crumbs?
Yes, they could be getting.
Are you kidding me? Do you know what entitlement spending is in the United States? Do you study any facts at all? Do you know that the richest 1% pay an enormous amount of the taxes, like 40% or more? It's insane how much of the tax bill is paid for by the rich. And the one of the reasons why it's so hard to control spending in the United States is what's called entitlements, or things which aren't non-discretionary spending, things which are baked into law and almost impossible to change. Things like welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, old age pensions, Social Security. You can't change these things. And it's trillions and trillions of dollars a year. So the idea that the rich are just getting their way when a tiny percentage of them are paying almost half the taxes, and the trillions of dollars are being poured into the maw of the poor. You and I just watching two different movies. That's all I'm telling you.
Well, okay. Maybe what I see is that there is the welfare system is not directed to benefit the majority of the population. It's directed to prop up the government. So they are doing whatever they can do to prop themselves up. They're not trying to represent the what's in the best interest of the majority.
Okay, hang on. So you're saying that it's not in the best interest of the majority. So if you run as a candidate, let's just say in America, if you run as a candidate and you say, I want to end the welfare state because it's not in the best interest of the poor or the majority, what do you think is going to happen to your political opportunities?
Yeah, so this is kind of what I was saying. This is why democracy is a self-correcting mechanism, because if you
if you're saying that the welfare state doesn't benefit the poor, then the poor should be smart enough to vote and say, well, we got to get rid of the welfare state, man. This is terrible for us.
Well, they're in a difficult situation. First of all, they're dependent on the state for their check. So it's very difficult for them to, think about 5 years or 10 years down the road when tomorrow they don't have food on the table. It's a very difficult proposition for them. So what they can do is, I do believe that people are not stupid enough to see that there's a lot of corruption in government. So what they're voting for the welfare check. They're not voting for the accompanying corruption in the government. They know that people are taking advantage of all this massive spending.
So here's the problem with democracy.
No. Let me finish.
Okay, just try and wrap it up relatively quickly.
Okay, all this spending in government, it's some of it is going to people, but a lot of it is money that's being siphoned off for people. People are, this government money is a trough where a lot more people than the people receive the money are using it. It's a means to an end. It's not there to benefit the majority. It's there as a means to end for the people in power to benefit themselves.
Okay, I mean, this is just an assertion, there's no facts. But I will say this, and I'll close off at this point, because I think we've gone about as far as we can go, at least in terms of my respect for democracy. But here's the problem, and that you might want to work on philosophically or intellectually, is that you say democracy, direct democracy or whatever, however you're going to phrase it, is good and self-correcting and self-sustaining and so on. But at the same time, you're saying that the majority of people who are poor, vast majority of people who are poor, are going to vote for the welfare state, which is bad for them. Now, if you've got the majority of people who are voting for the welfare state that's bad for them, you have a problem with democracy, whether it's direct or indirect. And that's sort of the point that I started with, which was that there's massive amounts of corruption.
You're not allowing me to make my case. This is something that I wanted to speak about. And because a democracy would allow the population to at least remove the corrupt candidates. They might want to keep the check, but they can remove the corrupt candidates. And then once you get less corruption in the system, then they will get candidates who are more willing to represent what is in the best interest of the majority. And they'll start looking at the system saying, look, this welfare check, this is what we're doing, it's not sustainable. 5-10 years down the road, I'm going to end up in a disaster. So because they're more trusted by the people who voted for them, because they are less corrupt than the people who were there previously, they will have more credibility, and they'll be able to put forward policies. They'll start to move towards what is actually in the collective good, rather than what's in the all this welfare stuff, all these welfare payments are not being directed to the majority because it's in the benefit of the majority. It's being directed to them because it benefits the people in power.
Okay, I'm going to have to interrupt you, and I'm sorry for doing that. Let's try and experiment. Let's try and experiment, because I mean, you're just saying stuff, right? I mean, there's no ethical reasoning behind what you're saying. There's no facts. I mean, you're just saying stuff. And to me, it's like you're just describing a dungeon that you're creating in 5th edition rules. So we've got a direct democracy. I guess we can do one here, right? So we've got 3 people on this call. There's yourself, there's myself.
I'm not talking about direct
democracy. Still talking. Yeah. There's yourself, there's myself, and there's Mike. So the question is, do we continue with this, what to me just seems like a bunch of nonsense syllables leading nowhere? Or like, do we continue with this, or do we move on to the next call? Now, I myself, I'm going to vote to move on to the next call. Mike, what's your vote here?
I'm going for next call.
All right. Sorry, we'd love to register your call, but we'd love to register your vote, I'm afraid, but it's 2-1, and that's what we call direct democracy.